I'm delighted to be here today. I'm actually a professor in the IB department. I'm a visiting assistant professor of international business and also the business language coordinator in the GW-CIBER, together with Margaret Konglewski, who's also here. And our director, Jennifer Spencer, is also in the audience today. And basically the CIBER, it's a federal grant from the Department of Education, and the mandate is basically to increase U.S. competitiveness in the global marketplace. That's what we're doing. Our specific umbrella mission here is institutions and development. And the specific program that I work with underneath this major umbrella has to do with business languages and business culture. So we try to teach students business languages specifically and about business culture. That's why this topic of today is so suitable for our CIBER. I'm delighted to be here today. It's exciting that we are for the first time co-sponsoring with CITAR, and also of course because Elisabeth is a Scandinavian compatriot, so I'm very delighted that you were able to be here today. But I'm going to allow now Juliet to say a few words about CITAR and also to introduce Elisabeth. But I'd like to welcome all of you and thank you for spending the evening with us tonight. There will be a reception afterwards. There's bathrooms outside and all the practicalities. If you need anything, let me know. We're all here to help if we can. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. As Anna mentioned, I'm here on behalf of CITAR, which is the Society for Intercultural Education, Training and Research. And we are an international organization with a local chapter here in DC. We have a partnership with GW-U, so we do sponsor most of our events here. And they are on different subjects of interest to the intercultural field, so we'll bring in speakers, book authors, and we'll have different events related to the field. So if people are interested in becoming members, our website is www.citar.dc, that's SIETAR.dc.org, and we welcome students and professionals in the field who are interested in the topics and in networking. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Elisabeth Plum, who is our noted speaker and author this evening, who has come to us from Copenhagen and somehow managed to miss the snowstorms and arrive safely yesterday in DC. Elisabeth is a visiting professor at Middlesex Business School in the UK, and she is also author of the book Cultural Intelligence, which she'll be discussing this evening. And this is the first book that has actually been translated in English, although she's also authored another book on diversity management. She also has her own company in Copenhagen where she's a senior advisor on change management and different intercultural issues to European companies both in the public and private sector. She also holds a PhD in cultural anthropology from Copenhagen University, and she's also a psychotherapist who specializes in organizational psychology. So I'd like to welcome Elisabeth.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for coming here and spending the night with us. I'm thrilled to be here with you. It has been great fun to travel around in US. And at the same time, this is a bit heavy, or a bit, isn't it too big, the noise? In the mic? Okay, okay. How much does that cost? Okay. At the same time, it's a special situation to be here in these times. I mean, we do have tough times. It's a very special epoch in our time. I mean, the global economy is bad, and many of us and the ones who we know, they are meeting tough times now. And I know that you, together with me, we would like to build for the hope and not to look for the fear. And I think that we do need, in times like this, to look and see what can we contribute with here. Because the times now, we can see that a lot of old paradigms are breaking down. A lot of paradigms, they won't fit to the situation we do have now and that we thought were how we should continue up and up and up and up. So we need to look at something we can contribute with in this situation here. And I think that some of the things we can do is to work more effectively and having more satisfaction by... I don't like this sound here. You don't hear it? No, it's very echoing. It's echoing a lot up here. So is it, I'm standing on a bad place, or? I've been instructed to stand between those two, so. And now the sound is funny. Okay, so I think that one of the places where we can contribute to growth in a broad sense is to be able to be better to work across differences. I mean, to work across, among people who think and act in different ways. This is where we can find more resources, because we won't have any more resources. There are scarce scarcity of resources out there. So we need to find clever ways of using the resources we have. And that goes for human resources as well. And I see a lot of waste out there. People working in silos in organizations, don't talk with each other across these silos. People have a lot of misunderstanding and avoiding each other and so on. And it's my hope that this concept of cultural intelligence here will contribute to us being able to work more clever and in a more satisfactory way across differences. I mean, across in all settings where people think and act in different ways. And already now you can hear me stumble in my words and so on. So I must accuse myself. I mean, I'm speaking in my second language and I'm a bit jet-lagged. So please hear what I mean and not what I say. So so help me here to make myself understood, and help me if I'm putting some words wrong. I think, what is she saying there? So, okay. So this is my hope that that we all can work in a more clever way with these differences. And I like these ones very well. When I come to, I always see them in Heathrow Airport. I haven't seen them other places. But I like that a different point of view is simply the view from the place where you are not. So remember that. And it's very much on purpose that I have shown these that are showing a broad sense of culture, because today you will hear me say culture a lot of times, but I would like you to know from the start that when I say culture, I mean culture in a broad sense. I mean all kinds of difference among people, professional differences, age, gender, organizational background, functions, work areas, and so on, and nationalities, of course. But it's a broad sense. Okay. I have written this book with 3 of my good colleagues from Denmark, and we have worked in Europe for many years as advisors and consultants and so on. And I'm a bit curious if this concept and our way of thinking can be helpful in an American concept. So I'm looking forward to discussing with you. And we have planned it this way that I start with my presentation, and then we take sort of a small dialogue and so on. Then I go further on and so on. So. Maybe we are too many people if you interrupt me along the way. So if you have any questions, please remember, and we will take small discussion breaks. So I hope you can live with that. Okay. Why did I like to say something about my background and how this is being designed. As Julia said, I have worked with culture in a broad sense. I have worked with cultural integration in mergers, acquisitions. I have worked with project groups, interdisciplinary project group, where they're supposed to work together across these their professions and educations and so on. I have worked with different personalities, like in team building, in leadership and so on. And I have worked in Europe with international leadership development. So I have worked with many differences. Oh, and apart from that, I have worked with diversity management in Europe too. And I have experienced working with these and unfortunately I've been contributing to this, but now I think I'm finished with that. As long as you focus on only one dimension, being the two merging companies or nationalities or gender or whatever, as long as you focus on only one dimension, you are actually part of the problem instead of being part of the solution, because you are strengthening the stereotyping and everything is being explained across these polar division of people. And everything is being projected out to us and them, and we are being professionals, being researchers, academics, and so on. If we only work with one dimension, we are actually we have that expression, digging the ditches deeper and developing this us and them, instead of trying to, even though you work to try to bridge the differences. But if you only focus on one dimension, you do that. And that is, among other things, that is because that nobody wants to be reduced to be only one part of her or his personality. Nobody would like to be reduced to being only a representative of a group. The woman, the Dane, and so on. Nobody wants that. So be aware of that. I have learned it the hard way because I've made a lot of mistakes myself there. Another thing is that I have seen in all these different branches that I've been working with, industries and issues, that it's the same cultural dynamics whether you're working across professions or organizational background or nationalities or whatever. And when I say cultural dynamics, I mean such things as the dynamic between majority and minority. You know, when suddenly a majority is established consciously or unconsciously, then a minority is also being established in the same microsecond. And that's one cultural mechanism. We could go into that, but I won't, because I think that you all know that mechanism. Another of the cultural mechanism is the one I call cultural blindness. It's actually a concept from Nancy Adler. And with that, I mean that that culture plays a role, but you don't see it or perceive it as culture. You perceive it as chemistry between people, personality, something else, political things. You don't perceive it as culture. And often it's because you are part of the majority. Because then you are sort of in the mainstream of what's going on, and you don't see that there are cultural differences. So cultural blindness is number 2 of the cultural mechanisms. The other one is the opposite, and that is to exaggerate the meaning of culture. Like you use culture as an explanation for everything. And you see that in mergers, you see it everywhere, like when people say, oh, that's because we have different cultures, full stop. Meaning, we can't bridge it, or we have to stop here, or whatever. So sometimes it's being exaggerated in a way, and that's not healthy either. So those are the 3 cultural dynamics I will mention today that are unhealthy or unhelpful mechanisms, and it's going on whether it's organizational, professional, whatever differences. Julia mentioned that I'm a psychotherapist as well, so of course I'm biased in that way because I see a lot of emotions going on, and I'm called to by companies to deal with when things have gone wrong and so on. And I think that a lot of, I'm told that irrational is not such a good word because it has a negative connotation, but it hasn't for me. Non-rational, I mean, what goes on below here, south of the head, in your whole organism, of something is going on, you have a reaction, you don't, but of course we are rational people, so we try to rationalize it. But you know, well, when you lose yourself, or when you say something and you thought, was that me saying that? So all of these things, there are many emotions and strong irrational reaction when differences meet each other. And I haven't seen, there's not much help in these conventional cultural models. They talk very much about cognition, about understanding other people, about bridging in an understanding way, and so on. And I think we have to deal with that very important issues. And it's of a tradition of dealing with the shadow side of things, dealing with the unconscious, and so on. So just to make you know where I come from. Another thing is that I see working with mergers and working with project groups and so on, some people think that the cultural issues, we can fix that in the start. And of course, it's better than nothing. If a new project group, a very diverse project group, if they have a kick-off seminar where they talk about their differences and how to bridge them and what to guiding lines for their work and so on, that's very fine. But if they stop there and then pretend that was over, we have done with the cultural business, then it's not much of a help. You need to deal with that along the way. It's not done with in the beginning. It's not something that can be fixed. It's something you have to approach and look upon in different ways along the way. And then another thing is that I'm rather critical towards the conventional cultural models that only deal with differences among people as problems, as barriers. I think there's a lot of synergy there to be harvested. a lot of interesting things going on there. Well, it may not be so comfortable when you are met with critical questions or things from another point of view. You're met with silly responses and so on. But there's a lot of learning there. And I would like to give you a concept one of my friends have invented. It's called innoversity. Innovation through diversity. And you can go on her website. She's called Susanne Justesen. Innoversity.org it's called. And I won't say more about that. It's just that I would like us to focus on both things. Yes, we need to bridge differences, and yes, there's a lot of things to harvest from that point of view. When I had written the book, somebody said, "Oh, I can see you are so inspired from Sonja Sackmann." And I said, "Excuse me, who?" And she's a German professor, so I will just a very short one, and she has written an article with Margaret Phillips in 2004, just again to place what we are talking about here. Sonja Sackmann says that there has been three context and matching cultural paradigms. When Hofstede did his stuff and his studies and all the models and the theories and so on, in the 80s, early 80s, that was an answer of a question called how do we dress individuals to go to travel to transact business in a foreign country? How do we prepare them for that? That was what was going on at that time. So Hofstede's models and theories, that was a sensible answer for that questions. After that came a period where we were focusing on international partnerships and learning. If I just say something like US and European companies, they would like to learn from the Japanese very successful companies. And how come they can do this? And the answer was always, oh, it's because of their culture. So that was the period where they were focused on the intercultural interaction, a bipolar sort of focus. That was, among other things, it was when Nancy Adler wrote her things, and it was, let me see, well, Kleinberg. I'm not familiar with Kleinberg. It's just to name drop. Some might know Kleinberg here. Okay, but now, says Sonja Sackmann, now we have entered a new area, and she calls it the complexity, the cultural complexity area, because the case is now that we don't not just work with people from other countries. We work in virtual teams. We have colleagues in other countries in virtual teams. We have colleagues from other professional background, from other age, gender, whatever. We have cross-national and cross-organizational mergers, acquisitions. We have cross-disciplinary work. I mean, in a modern knowledge-intensive organization today, everybody has to be prepared to be a colleague to whoever is there. So we need to be very broad-minded and need to be very active in this cultural complexity. And that's why those old-fashioned, or old-fashioned you can say here, they don't fit to this world because they are reducing things to a perspective that's much too narrow. Sonja Sackmann says we need to look at the multiple cultural perspective, and that's perspective where each individual is seen with a multiplicity, is it called that? Of different cultures. I mean, I'm a cultural sociologist, I'm a woman, I'm 56, I'm a Dane, I'm everything. And a week ago at Stanford University, I heard a presentation from Jennifer Gibbs, and she had a very nice picture. She said, we need to look at culture from a perspective of kaleidoscope of the cultural complexity in a group, in a setting. When you're turning your kaleidoscope, you don't quite know what the next picture will be because you can't predict it, you can't plan it, you can't control it. So when you're turning the kaleidoscope, something new appears. You don't know quite when it appears, and you don't know how it looks. And that's how I see culture in a group, that you don't know if it is a national dimension that will pop up and be interesting or perceived as important to bridge, or if it be age or professions or whatever. So culture as a kaleidoscope, and the cultural complexity as a kaleidoscope. I think that's a very nice notion here. As you can see, I am from a tradition you could call the interpretive or complex notion of culture. I see culture as a social construction. I don't see culture as a thing out there or an essence in here. I see it as a construction that we produce, we negotiate culture, also in our sort of groups, but we also negotiate and produce it when we are among new people and so on. So just to let you know that that this kaleidoscope picture is from this interpretive or complex culture school. That is another one, that the positivist school. Just to, okay, we are approaching. Yes, I think we have gone through this. The meaning of nationality is often exaggerated. Yes, groups have, they have cultures, but individuals cannot fully be described through one. I have gone through this one. Yes, and then the last thing is, the important thing is not cultural differences as such, or cultures as such. The important thing is the meaning we attach to it. So that's a very important thing too. Because sometimes you tend to stick to the cultures as such, but you find yourself that something that you perceive as important is not being perceived from outside as important. You're being seen outside like something else, and that's some of the problems in intercultural communication and encounters, that being defined from outside is not exactly creating trust and good collaboration, but that's what we often find ourselves in situations like that, and that's what we like to get rid of. So let's go to, I'll just present this now, the concept, that we will have some questions and dialogue after this. It is, I will come back to that, it is a combination of heart, brain and muscles, like the emotional drivers, the cultural knowledge and the practical methods. And the whole core of it is the ability to create a fruitful collaboration in situations where cultural differences play a role. So it might be, I mean, it's a common ground, it's the establishment, the creation of a common ground between people who think and act from different backgrounds. That is the important thing. So you cannot be cultural intelligent by yourself. Doesn't make sense, because you don't know what kind of settings you are being exposed for and how you will react. And this is a critical note to other cultural intelligence concepts that tend to, they are called CQ, like Q in quotient, that they would like to measure cultural intelligence among individuals. And I don't think that makes sense, but we might go back to that. So this about establishing a common ground among people who think and act on different backgrounds is important. And the other one is that we both like to prevent conflicts, to bridge people, people's different backgrounds and so on, and we would like to harvest the synergy. That is also very important. So, I'll show this one, because this is the main model. There you see the heart, the brain, and the muscles. And they are interdependent, totally interdependent. And let me go through and make a definition of this. When we talk about intercultural engagement, we are talking about the part that is about the emotions, about the unconscious maybe, the parts from the irrational things going on in a cultural encounter. So these are the drivers in a situation. These are the personal drivers into a situation, the interest in other people, the interest, the courage to become changed in the cultural encounter. Do you dare to be changed? And what is your motivation to meet with these people? And how about your psychological, cultural maturity to deal with the things that's going on there? I know you have, I have anyway, being in situations where you suddenly got red ears because something awkward was happening. Ooh, something was, so you demonstrate intercultural engagement if you can allow yourself to be there and contain those feelings, those emotions, and to go on from there. Instead of just reacting from your primitive, I don't know, kind of part of brain, you can contain those feelings and maybe take it as a signal that, something is going on here. I'm reacting in a way. So why don't I ask for information? And then you go to this one. But you see, to be able to contain your own and other people's awkward or emotional reaction, that's the driver in the situation. So talking about the emotional stuff in an encounter, here we talk about the fire. Here we talk about the interesting fire that can sort of ignite synergy, and really suddenly people can invent new things because they are getting stupid questions and whatever. But we are also talking about the fire that can destroy a relationship, that can create distance and interrupt and mistrust and so on. So this is a fire in the situation, and it's so important, and I talk about this a bit because it's the most unusual part of the concept I have here, this about the irrational and emotional stuff. Okay, let's go to the cultural understanding. The most important thing here is to look in your mirror and to understand yourself. Cultural self-understanding is the most important thing. You cannot understand other people before you understand yourself as a cultural being. Before you can see, I'm not the norm, I'm not the right one. What I do, what I think, how I interpret a situation, how I react emotionally is part of or is caused by my cultural backgrounds. That's the most important thing to acknowledge. And then comes also, of course, an understanding of what culture brings to a situation. What is the impact of culture in communication and so on? So a general knowledge of culture and a specific knowledge of culture. Here we also have the flexibility, the cognitive flexibility to be able to see the situation with other eyes, or to move to another level and have an overview and so on. This is all to do with the cognition or metacognition, somebody would say. So this is that dimension here. Intercultural communication we have called the action. That's the action. That's what it's really being played out in a situation. We call it communication because everything is communication. You cannot not communicate. The most important concept here is that you are able to not let go, because you cannot fully do that, but to try to reduce your own cultural autopilot. Because when you are with people you know, and your own group, and this group or that group and so on, you drive on your cultural autopilot. You take a lot of things for granted, you don't explain yourself very much, you know what reactions, how to interpret and so on. But in a cultural encounter, intercultural encounter, you need to try to reduce that one and switch to a manual steering. And what is manual steering? That is to be a bit more slow, a bit more deliberate, have bigger ears, and ask for, when you say decision, let's hear, what do you mean by decision? When you say leadership, good leadership, strong leadership, let's talk about strong leadership. How do you see strong leadership? How do I see it, and so on? So, and ask for information to make ground rules and so on. That's the manual steering, that you are a bit more deliberate. Actually, I learned that about manual steering in this very city. I was visiting 12 years ago, and I'm a Dane and have a Danish traffic culture. And my Danish friend, he had lived here for 5 years. And I was hiring a car and going out in the street, and Annette told me, Elisabeth, don't go anywhere before you have learned these things. When you drive in Washington, please be aware of the lanes, because sometimes there are 3 lanes in some streets, and sometimes it's going one way, and other times it's going in another way. It's because of rush hour. So look up, so you are sure where you are. When you are approaching a crossing, look who has come just before you and who are coming after you. I mean, you do it all day, but we don't do it in Denmark. So you know when it's your turn. And if people try to come out from side streets, keep back so they can come out. I'm so embarrassed to say this, but we don't do that in Denmark. We just move ahead. And that's their problem, that they can't get out. So I had to learn to drive a car here, not to be impolite or not to break, get the car, destroyed or whatever. So I thought I had a very strong feeling when I was driving around on this manual steering. I had to be very much aware of the situation and everything around. And after some time, I got more used to it. And when I came back to Denmark, it was terrible. I thought people were so impolite. They were like driving like crazy. Yes, okay. Yes, that was about the intercultural communication. So other than that, it's also to be able to move on the meta level of things. You know, when you're in a conversation, going on a meta level would say, talk about how we talk, to try with these guiding lights and so on. Okay, in one way, being able to separate them is very useful because it gives you an ability to analyze the situation, to get an overview and to see when you're working with a group, hey, what's going on here? Is it a problem in the intercultural engagement we have, or don't they understand each other, or what's going on here? So you can analyze it, and you can have a clue of where should I how could I intervene to help them to get further on. And of course, these three dimensions, they have all their logics that are very different. In another way, you cannot nearly separate them because it's going on that quick. It's sort of intervened, and they are totally. It's shifting and the whole time, and it's a holistic way. So in another way, you can't separate them, but we do it because it's a useful tool, it's a useful analysis, it's a useful sort of overview you have of situations. So that was the model. So why don't we? Is it familiar to you? I mean, does it make sense to you? Have any questions, any comments? The other part is a knowledge of culture as such, the role it plays in communication and so on. So the general knowledge of culture, the theories of culture and so on, and a specific knowledge of culture. I mean, if I, as a sociologist, are entering a group and they are engineers, all of them, it's clever of me to think about, hey, how might they perceive me? And what is my knowledge about engineers? How can I make them listen to me? I might not, it's another thing that when I talk with sociologists or psychologists, so these are engineers. So how do I bridge that gap there? How, of course, I use my preconceptions, or you could say stereotypes, but it is clever to try to prepare yourself a bit instead of just pretending they are like you and so on. Yes? It's just if some of you have questions or comments or... Yes, do you have a comment? Yes. You say it sounds abstract, and it would be nice to with some examples and so on. Yes, yes. So let me give you one example of working in a IT company, software company. I was advising a group of project managers because they should start some new project, and of course it was interdisciplinary and functional projects, people from different function and different disciplines. So these project managers should be better at benefiting from these differences and bridging them so they could have a more fulfilling collaboration and less problems. And they could understand each other better. So with that group of project managers, we worked with a cultural intelligence indicator. So each of them, if I can go back here, these are the 3 dimensions. There's an indicator where these ones are spelled out in 5 different aspects, and then they made an analysis of their group. How good are we, how interested, my bunch of people, how interested are they in each other? How interested are they, do they prefer to be in this very heterogeneous group, or would they rather be in a homogeneous group? Do they want to learn from each other, or are they not that? And how good, as far as I know them, how good are they at to address and to go on from if something awkward happens. So they make sort of an analysis of that from what they could think about. The next one was, of course, to answer questions here and then to answer questions here. So they made sort of it's kind of a CI profile of the group. And then they could see where are our strengths in this group, where are they good, what can I build upon, and where do I have to be more careful? Where do I have to, one example was that some of these IT engineers, IT architects, or what they're called, programmers and so on, they were not that interested in each other. They would rather work with some of their colleagues. So this guy, he worked with, why are we here together? What is the purpose of bringing all these differences together? We know it's more complicated to work in a different group than in a more homogeneous group. So what's the whole purpose, and how can we bridge, and what is in it for me, and so on. So he worked with the more emotional stuff, the more you could say the interest, what you usually do not bring out in professional settings. So he worked a bit with that, so people could voice their hesitations and their wishes to be there, and what they were reluctant about, and what they would like to gain from this. And then that was one thing that a manager could work with, analyze a group like that. But it can also be used in a group of people who work with each other. I mean, it could be a virtual team meeting, and they could use this CI indicator as a way to start a dialogue. Because what is extremely important here is that we develop people's language to talk about differences. I think that we are trapped in our language. We can only talk about the things that we have a language to talk about things in. So if we only have, now I'm making it a bit black and white, but if we only have a Hofstede language on differences, then we see everything from Hofstede's categories and nothing else. So here you can help people to develop more language, a more elaborate language on differences. And that will help them to address things that otherwise need to be addressed outside, you know, that you can talk about in the corridors. It's not a professional issue or so. So help to in a group to develop and increase the vocabularium and create language with each other to talk about differences. But then the interesting thing about such a CI indicator is that it is not a measurement tool. It is a dialogue tool that develops cultural intelligence while you're talking about it. Because this group that used the dialogue tool, they took it up 3 months later when they have worked in this the virtual team here. And the next time they went through the indicator, it was more negative. Why? Because they had get more experience with each other. And because they had become more aware of some of their old blind spots. And they were more courageous about talking about things. So something that they, in the first hand, say, oh yes, we are so good at it, and we are so interested in each other, and you know, like this. That was on a more superficial level. But when they had thought about it and worked with each other for 3 months, they could see, we are only average good here. We could do better. And this issue we have not addressed. So you see my point? It can be more negative because it's more, it's on a deeper level. It's more developed and more addressed. So it's actually a signal that the people have developed their language and developed their awareness, so they see more things and are able to address more things. Was that an example? Was that giving a bit more to you? Okay, fine. Yes? You have a comment?
Well, I thought about, you made me think of, there was an organization that was going to engage with Afghanistan Americans. And they found that the way to connect Americans with the Afghans on the team was not based on the national cultural differences, but the shared culture of loss, because those
Culture of loss.
Because the Americans were those who had lost someone in the 9/11 attacks, and then also to connect with Afghans who had lost through the war and through their history.
Yeah.
And so it was that culture that emerged based on the emotional.
They're connecting here. Yes.
Even though on national, religious level they were quite different, but it was in that place of sharedness of culture of loss that they came together, and over time they really emerged to do some very profound work amongst themselves.
Interesting. Very interesting. So this is something about connecting heart to heart, to use big words here. Yeah. Interesting. Yes?
With the cultural understanding, I just wanted to get your opinion on something as far as black and white goes. How can somebody improve their cultural understanding? Can you assume that more exposure to different culture means they'll increase their cultural understanding? So can you then assume that someone living in a homogeneous society or working in one company for 50 years means that they have low cultural understanding? Like, for example, I think of Washington, D.C. as a very transient town. People are always coming in and out, so you should be exposed to many cultures, and the people coming in should be exposed to many cultures.
Are you talking about national cultures or more broad sense?
Oh, no, just more broad.
Yes.
And then we have the stigma of the inside the beltway kind of thinking that comes out. So how is it that we have this, I guess, low cultural understanding in D.C., even though we have so many different cultures? Meaning, so basically my question is, does increased cultural exposure increase your understanding?
Not automatically. Definitely not automatically. That depends on how you reflect on your experiences. It's very important that, to take one example, to have international experiences does not automatically mean that you are culturally intelligent. Not at all. I've actually met a guy. He was a Danish person, and he was working in a high technical company. So he has a kind of a technical educational background. And he was a man, and he was middle-aged or something. And he said, "Oh, Elisabeth, honestly, you're making this much too complicated. It's so easy to go out there." And he was working in a new EU country. He said, I have traveled there for years and years, and I'm just myself. So you're making it much too complicated. I'm very good at this. But then I had the chance of talking with some of his colleagues from those countries. And they say, "Okay, yeah, we will only work with this guy as long as we are dependent on his knowledge. As long as we are not dependent on his knowledge, we will kick him out. He's such a brute. He is so undiplomatic. He is so not aware of who we are. He's never asking us questions. He's never listening to us. He's never asking if this could be applied to our company and so on. He's a bulldozer." So he thought he was very culturally intelligent because he was traveling around and just being himself and so on. So it's not at all automatically. So I talked with a friend this morning from the World Bank, and she whispered something to me about, well, we could work with that concept here. I said, "Come on, you're so international," and so on. "Yeah, on a level," she said, "because we are not always addressing it. We might walk around being very international, but some issues are issues, and some issues are definitely non-issues and not to be talked about." And I have experienced that in OECD as well, where I worked some years ago, and they said, "Don't talk about national cultures. Don't voice it. No, because we are international here." But in the end of the day, we don't voice it in meetings and so on, but where we talk about it in the corridors, in the restrooms, pauses, breaks, and so on. "Oh, that was typical German, wasn't it? And here comes the French again," and so on. But no, we are not supposed to talk about it, and it's not an issue, actually. So you can see that it is not an automatic thing. But having said that, I mean that it is the way you reflect upon those differences. And I think that you can get cultural knowledge, cross-cultural knowledge, by being, what do you call that? We have a notion in Scandinavia called a class traveler, one who is brought up in one social class but have moved to another social class, it's upwards. So being very much aware of social classes makes you very much aware of differences. It could also be going from being brought up in the countryside and moving to a city. Or it could be being the only male in a hospital and among nurses. But it all depends on how you reflect upon it, how you use it. If you take it for granted or just sort of cope with it, or if you work on it. What's your own experience here?
Oh, I've lived on different sides of the country here and traveled abroad and work in an international organization here, but I've definitely found that I think people assume in DC because we're all from different places and have such different work experiences and bring so much to the table that people I've found focus on what they bring to the table more than how they interact with other people culturally.
Okay, so it's like that on the surface there's a lot going on across differences, but it stops at some point, so there's a lot underneath.
Yeah.
Yes. So how can we come down there and benefit from all of that?
It sounds like by talking about it or being more open.
Yeah. But how come we don't? I mean, it's so obvious, isn't it, that we are different? So what are your experiences what stops people from voicing more of this?
I think a lot of people are scared. That they just want to be comfortable.
Comfortable, that's it, I think. That's one of the reasons, I think. That you want to stay in your comfort zone. But not the only reason. But because if you address some of these things, you might leave your comfort zone. And yes, and of course it takes some more effort. But I mean, that's why I think we should use it. We should bring it more into the professional scene and say that these things are professional, profound. We need to. There's a lot of benefit there for us. And if we don't address these things, we stick into our boxes. So we need to do it, but it might not. So how can we work on that with the comfortable zone, the comfort zone? You know, this Susanne Justesen, the university person, she has made a PhD, and she found out that in groups, heterogeneous groups who were supposed to be innovative, they only stayed heterogeneous and had access to their differences if they worked on it, if they addressed the diversity, the differences all the time. If they did not address it, if they did not voice it, they what do you call it, confluenced, they melted together on a safe basis where they were all comfortable. But in a group, if you would like to use the differences, benefit from it, get constructive confrontations and so on, you need to be able to confront things, not in an aggressive way, but to ask silly questions or to give unexpected responses and so on. You need to keep the ball rolling about differences. You need to find your language in such a group to talk about difference in a way that doesn't feel uncomfortable for you. You need to find your comfortable way of addressing these things in a professional way. And you need to be on the edge. And yes, there are tensions there. But if we do it in a professional way, it should be tensions that we can cope with if we have tools to do it. That's the point. Yes, well, we are more or less. So let me see. The CI model, no. A small comments about the emotional dimension. We have talked a bit about how strong impact emotional and irrational reaction they have on our results, on our collaboration and so on. And one more thing I'll put into it is that in knowledge-intensive organizations today, and most of our organizations are knowledge-intensive, I see trust as the blood veins in the organization, because we are totally dependent on each other to exchange knowledge, to exchange information, to rely on each other, to help each other, to work in all these different settings. And there we need trust. If we don't have trust, we withdraw to our own comfort zone. And we need to be out there and addressing all these things. So if we don't trust each other, these knowledge-intensive organizations will not be as effective as they could be. And people need trust. They need to feel heard, seen, and understood to unfold their full potential. Otherwise, we don't do it. If we don't feel heard, seen, and understood, we will stay and we will explain where we stand, and we will keep explaining our viewpoint until we have an idea that other people understand us. If we don't feel understand, we will stick to our sort of our way of seeing things. So this about trust I see as a key to this knowledge-intensive organization, because as you can understand, we are not as rational as we would like to think we are. We are not. And we are not as rational as some other cultural concepts would like to think that we are. I'm sorry to say we are not. But let's see it as an opportunity instead of it, and be able to work with it and talk to it and to talk about it and address it. Because this is where we see the fuel, this is and the synergy. So the last one, it embraces the cultural CI. I call it CI and not CQ, as you can understand. I see it as a cross-cultural competence, a general competence. We move beyond, we go on the meta level, because honestly, in this knowledge-intensive global organization, we cannot, it's not possible to learn about other people's culture. Okay, you are a Swede and you're American and you're an engineer and you're, stop a bit. It's getting too complicated. We cannot learn about every other people's culture. That's not, I mean, it's insane and it won't help anyway. So we need to move to the next level and see the general patterns as I have been speaking about today. Because there are often several cultural differences playing a role, as we have talked about. So we're trying to provide a systematic approach and a new language. And this about language I see as a very, very important thing. And I hope that you will all contribute to this about working on the language on this, so we have a bigger scene to work on, a more interesting scene, a more interesting position to address these things, so we can continue to develop and to make more common ground where people think and act differently. That's the whole point in this. Oh, yeah. Yes, more questions or comments or? Yes, you have?
Yes, what do you think about the internal interactions of the intercultural communication? Like in Hofstede's, like in a high power sort of situation where maybe inside the international business, lower level employees do not feel comfortable communicating with higher level bosses. What can be done to increase the communication in that sense?
I think that thank you for that comment, because I haven't been talking about this today. I think that power is a very important issue to bring into our intercultural discussions, because there are always power playing a role in each and every situation. So that's important. So you remember I talked about the majority-minority mechanisms or dynamics. That's a power play as well. So first of all, there's always power, and be aware and look for the power in the situation, because that also plays a role in an intercultural encounter. The next thing you are asking is about about Hofstede's categories, about having different notions of power distance and so on. I cannot just solve the problem, but I would say one important step is to address it, is to acknowledge that here we do have different power distances, or among other things, some national differences play a role here with different acknowledgement and different interpretations about power, and execute power and how to react on power and so on. So first step will be to begin to talk about it, because that will again, giving people a language to talk about it is one thing, but these people from underneath cannot solve it themselves. It needs to be solved in an organizational level, so it's being addressed on an organizational level, I think. So it's a very big question, but talking about it, addressing it on an organizational level, and continue to work on it in several ways, both so people in power can see it and understand it more, so they can find ways of including these people, asking more actively, making situations where they can voice their opinions without being trapped in a power play, and people who are employees, ordinary employees, can also see that, hey, we have a cultural problem here. Don't take this power distance for granted. Try to experiment with some other things, try to see how other people addresses this, and make safe settings where you can experiment with trying to break the ordinary patterns and see people from other dimensions than nationalities. Is another one. Yes, are we sort of closing this or what? Oh, more comments, yes?
So I definitely agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I feel that at the same time it's really applied to the individual. And in reality, when you're talking about companies, it's a mass of people that has to culturally understand and communicate together. So for example, I work for a consulting company. A lot of what we help our clients do is go through change management. We come in, we host an interactive dialogue session. We have people come from different departments of the company where cultures are very different, their groups are very different. They communicate, they agree on a solution, and we feel that they culturally understand each other, they realize the problem, and can go out and disseminate that information. But the problem then lies in having the whole organization and a mass of people work together to culturally understand each other. And what is your kind of solution, what suggestion for that?
I mean, I'm not sure if I get your point right. You say that it's also about individuals.
Well, it is, but it has to have a lot of what you're talking about. I feel like has to happen together.
You're right. Yes, you're right.
Level, and that's very difficult.
I would prefer to work with several levels in an organization. I would like to advise the top management how to see that organization more culturally intelligent, how to begin to develop the language, and how to see how they use differences or not use differences and so on, how they can design their organization and their interactions in a way so people are exposed to differences and use those differences. And I also would like to work on a group level with project group, with management teams and so on, as we talked about. And of course, it can also be a help to help individuals to improve their cultural intelligence. But I think it needs to happen in a group setting. I think you need to work in a situation, I mean, being a virtual team or project group or a management team and so on. So I think it's appropriate to work and most fulfilling to work in a group level, but only if it's been supported from above, from the top management. But it's no use to send 5 people to a CI course. That won't help. And so I guess you agree with me that, but is your comment also that that we seldom get the opportunity of working how we'd like to work?
Well, I think the top-down approach, and that's the most common approach, is going to the top, and that's where it starts disseminating down into the organizations, but it doesn't work.
No, you're totally right.
And
it can stop in that way.
If you start from the middle or the bottom, that also oftentimes fails. So it's kind of a catch-22 there.
Well, if you can do both, it's better. if you can make really help people create success some places where it can spread from, and other people can see, wow, they're doing good here. That has been happening in some organizations. They can say, how are they doing it, these people here? But I just want to mention that because of the power, it has to be supported from top management and not being worked against, not being made difficult from top management. I mean, you need to. It's more effective to work from both sides, down and up. But that's you often don't get the opportunity of doing that things. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I recall you saying that we sometimes exaggerate culture, and when dealing with people of different areas, different parts of the world where history has not really served at their best.
Please speak up. I can't hear so good.
When dealing with people from different areas of the world where history has not been very much at their best, and what would you recommend, let's say, a native person from Panama who's very close-minded in a way, like very reluctant about accepting any type of westernization in a way? What would you recommend about that?
Thank you for that question. I cannot answer it, though, but it reminds me of that this might not be a cultural issue. It might be a leadership issue. Sometimes, I mean, you have to be very aware of that everything that goes on in a cross-cultural group is not about culture. It's sometimes about leadership. And sometimes something that the leadership, that this is not the only problem with this person, or the only challenge with this person. So I would start with it as a leadership challenge. How should I lead this person to become a member of this group, to contribute to the whole team and to contribute and make good performance? And there might be a cultural issue in it, and there might not be. But I will address it as a leadership issue firsthand. It might sound funny, but that's what I will do. Somebody is saying yes here? Yes.
Because it seems more like every single time more and more international students are getting out of the country, and whenever they come back, they are seen as foreigners.
Yes. Yes. And that's, I mean, if you reduce people to be representatives of one group, you put them in a box. And nobody of us would like to be put in a box. So it discriminates people, and it steals their competences if you do like that. Don't give them an opportunity to show who they are and to use their full competences if you put them in a box, if you reduce them to being only a representative of a group. But it's a power game. It's a power game very much. So often the majority, they do like this to keep people down. Isn't that right? Unfortunately. Sometimes consciously, other times just, we're used to doing that. Unfortunately. Okay. Should we sort of,
Yep.
yeah,
Well,
say
thank you so
thank you.
much, Elisabeth. You can